I guess the best place to go. Andy, what did you think of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
So I loved it because I love this kind of film. This is Tarantino at his most restrained and his most mature, because Tarantino has been known to be self-indulgent, overindulgent. The Hateful Eight was probably the epitome of that. Tarantino loves writing tons of dialogue and having long scenes for 10 minutes where characters just talk and it's all in one shot. And he doesn't do that in this film. He's very restrained. He doesn't have these incredibly long shots of dialogue. There is violence in this movie because his films are known for gratuitous violence. That's dialed back as well. We don't get all the kind of fight scenes and shoot 'em ups that we get in his previous work. It's much more about this philosophical love letter to Hollywood, about its golden era and kind of the end of it and the start of a new one. It's a very different film, and we see this in our characters, with which we have brilliant performances all around. I don't want to say too much.
Yes.
But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was his most mature film, and I think it's deeply philosophical. It is deeply divisive. People have hated it. People have loved it, and I think it's a great film. And I think that's why we've said so many times on this show that enjoying cinema is all about the expectations you bring. And I think people that haven't enjoyed it thought they were going to go see Django Unchained or Kill Bill or Inglourious Bastards. That's what they were waiting for, and it's not that kind of film.
I agree. I think this is a different I think a more restrained Tarantino is a fine place to start. This movie is coming off the heels of his 8th film, which is
The Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight. Man, this is a lot of movie to talk about. I'm glad we're only doing this one this week. Which was a fairly violent film, arguably his most violent. This one, maybe not so much. There's definitely still some Tarantino hallmarks. That's important. But you're right. Like, the dialogue, the violence, it's all just dialed back a hair. And it doesn't hurt it. In fact, if anything, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has an energy to it. It's got a movement, and it's fast, and it comes at you quick. And I love it. The music is moving, and it goes, and it keeps. It's got a high beat per minute, and it just keeps going one after another. And you stay tuned in, you stay plugged in. And whenever it starts to get slow, whenever you feel like things are really starting to dip, it will immediately change to another plot line. It will pull some kind of editing trick to get you back in the chair, or it'll tweak continuity and make sure you're staying tuned in. And I love it. I never even check my watch. Which is a compelling thing, and it doesn't happen all the time, and I want to talk about why that is. So what's the best place to dig into this? I guess the handful of plot lines, because there's a few.
Yes, and okay. One criticism I have seen, people have said nothing happens in this movie. This movie isn't about anything. It doesn't have any narrative. That is completely false. It is a very mature and complex movie, and it's easy to go over the heads of Philistines and heretics everywhere. So like I said, at the beginning, we have Leonardo DiCaprio feeling like he's washed up. He's no longer Jake Cahill, the leading man on Bounty Law. And, we get these great odes to 1950s TV with DiCaprio in black and white and the banner going up on screen. It's great. And again, all these things are tributes to that time, which is very different because Tarantino often, pays homage to films of the 50s and 60s. And I feel this is very much an homage towards TV of the 50s and 60s. But he decides to kind of take this role as a villain on a pilot episode, and he's really, really concerned about it, and he really wants to learn his lines, do the best he can, because he does not want to fade into the limelight. And so we get a number of great scenes of him preparing for these roles, for him going through it. There's a brilliant scene with a young actress named I'm not going to be able to find it.
I don't have her name. Yeah, she's great though.
She's a child actress. She's like 8. And she's brilliant, and she plays a foil to him. They have this great scene when they're on set where she's 8 years old. She's reading a book about acting, and she's like, "Oh, when the actor prepares this, when the actor prepares that," like she's totally into this. And
Julia Butters is her name.
Thank you,
Julia Butters.
And Tarantino's at the opposite end. He's his success is fading, and he's trying to recapture it. So there's a lot of that brilliance of the legend I was versus the person I am now, and trying to recapture that. So that's a long plot line, and we have a sequence where he does that, and where he eventually does go to Italy to film some spaghetti westerns as well. Like I said, go ahead. There's so much going on.
I don't know if I should jump in here. Yeah. Meanwhile, while you've got Rick Dalton struggling to kind of find himself in a world that he feels like sees him as a has-been, you have his kind of chauffeur, I'd say sidekick, but really his gopher, Cliff Booth, played wonderfully by Brad Pitt, who is this very charming man in his 50s, I'd say, stuntman who looks great and is smart and can fight, and he's got everything going for him in the world. Like he's Mr. Boy Scout, but he's got an oddly curious past, which has led him to living in a trailer and driving a crappy car, which is a perfect foil for our man Rick Dalton, who he is, again, stuntman for. He is consistently just outside the limelight, but he's every bit as worthy of it as Rick Dalton is. He just doesn't seem to want it. He seems to enjoy his life as a kind of layabout. That's
a perfect summary of Brad Pitt's character, who is Cliff Booth. Cliff is enjoying the day. He is enjoying his life as it is, which compared to Rick Dalton, Rick Dalton lives on Cielo Drives. He lives in Beverly Hills or wherever that is. Like, he's a movie star. People know who he is. Like, he bought a house in Hollywood or in, wherever expensive it must be. Cliff Booth is living in a trailer behind a drive-in, but he's loving it. He doesn't love it, but he's enjoying what he has. He's enjoying the moment. He's not worried about how things were. You don't even get any backstory. You don't know. He's enjoying how things are, and so he doesn't have this inner turmoil of like, I've lost it, I'm washed up. He's like, man, it's cool, man, we're good. And like we said, when Margot Robbie's character Sharon Tate, who doesn't speak much in this film, she's at the beginning. She's, again, kind of a foil to DiCaprio. She's at the beginning of her career. She's beginning to be known and recognized. There's a scene where she goes into a screening of The Wrecking Crew so she can watch herself on screen. And, she, when other people laugh at her jokes and they see her on screen, she's really digging. She's totally in love with being a Hollywood star. And again, so it's about the rising and falling of different stars, of different legends, and you have Brad Pitt that's just waltzing through life. Like, he's not worried about that, about his stardom or his success, because he has none.
Right, and all of this is, of course, set in the backdrop of 1969 Hollywood, leading up to the Manson family murders, which is exactly what you said at the beginning of this, the turn in Hollywood when things were suddenly changed. It was like, oh man, maybe this isn't the way it should be. Glamour is not respected. Like, it was just at the turn of the 70s. Like, things are just about to change. Things are just about to be different. And it's such a perfect little time capsule for that. Tarantino is very specific about nailing, things that are true to life on camera, and doing his research and finding radio stations that sound correct and billboards and working over Hollywood Boulevard. I got a friend who lives out in California, and he knows some people who live around where this was shot. He said they shut down streets for like weeks to film this movie, like without hesitation or remorse. Like, I'm doing it right and authentic, and I'm using as little CGI as possible. And it shows. It really helps you fall into the world of the film. The setting is so well done. The costuming and the feeling of it is tremendous. Really helps you get into it.
Right. I was going to continue with Cliff Booth, his kind of storyline. At one point, he sees this hippie kind of on the street hitchhiking, and he comes across her several times and eventually decides to, give her a lift. Where out to Spawn Ranch, where the the Manson cult is.
Yes.
And coincidentally, he knows the Spawn Ranch because he had shot some films out there as a stuntman. So he's out there now, and it's a completely different place. There's a bunch of hippies living in there. There's, like 3 men and 20 women. It's one of those situations, and they seem to be giving horse riding trails to tourists.
Right, tourists, yeah.
And this is a very interesting part of the of the movie. And again, it has that real authentic look, the way like the clothes are, the sets, and we get a number of brilliant shots with these people on horseback that are clearly reminiscent of the glory days of the Western. And it's a really interesting part of what this represents, because I think this is also part of, the flower power 60s free love whatever era was also coming to an end. So this is what kind of this section represents as well. And you're exactly right. Like everything looks so authentic.
Yeah, it all looks so good. And there's this great dynamic of Rick Dalton's character, who is not a fan of hippies, or really anybody who isn't a Caucasian male in Hollywood. He's got some hot takes, which is, a divisive thing Tarantino does. We might talk about that a little bit more in our next segment. But I enjoy the way hippies are presented in this movie as a generational foil for, I think, what we're seeing nowadays, right? Millennials and boomers and the old versus the new, and these kids who nobody seems to understand but are young and living life to the fullest. And in a lot of ways, our character Cliff Booth can relate to that, which is why he kind of gets tangled up in this weird little subplot. But fortunately, he lives for the moment, not for what's coming tomorrow, as the hippies do. And he seems to kind of just surf through all of that. He's an oddly Lebowski style Zen character in this movie, and I really enjoy that. He's not the main character, but I would watch a whole movie about this guy. It's great.
Yeah, he could have a whole backstory, for sure. Where do we go next?
Well, we should talk about Sharon Tate.
Yes.
We should talk about Charles Manson, who are both utilized in a very particular way in this movie, in that they're hardly in it. It is really a story about Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, and you fall off from there. Even Cliff doesn't get that much time compared to Rick. They are barely in the film. They're important, but they're used very effectively. It's a very Tarantino thing, right? Like, I'm going to show you this thing and then pull the camera back, and you don't need to worry about that just don't think about it that much. This is going on over here. Here's a flashback to what's going on and back to this. And it's very focused. It's very fine. But it's effective.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on them. And you still want to know when things are kind of slowing down with the other plots where it's going. And that's when it pivots real hard and goes right back to, oh, hey, here's what's happening over here. Okay, back to Rick. And here's Cliff, and back to Rick. And then here's what's going on over here. It's not non-sequential like something like Pulp Fiction. There is a jump in time in the film. But for the most part, it's pretty clear. In fact, if anything, there are timestamps over the whole movie. It says, hey, here's the date, here's the time, here's what's going on. There's a little bit of narration, I think, via Kurt Russell did the narration for this movie.
Yes.
Which kind of walks you through things. And like I said earlier, some editing tricks. A couple of jump cuts on occasion. At one point, he'll flash characters' names up on screen, which feels weird in a Tarantino flick for somebody who's so expository with dialogue. Just be like, oh, here's exactly who those are. Great, right back to the movie. But he's done it before. He does that in his movies, weird tricks, and I was thinking of that scene in Pulp Fiction when Uma Thurman draws that square on screen.
Right,
yeah. That always pops out to me. So very Tarantino, but very restrained, and I thought that was really cool.
Speaking of other Tarantino movies, there are a number of references to a number of other properties, direct and indirect, possibly some other characters, though not confirmed, that also show up in this. I'm not going to spoil any of those surprises, but be on the lookout, and you fans who are well versed in his filmography will recognize lots of references to other properties, some of which I even noticed in the trailer itself, but even more so in the film. So that's a lot of fun.
Let's talk about our runtime. 2:45. Too long?
I thought it was fine. I didn't check my watch once. As a great Roger Ebert used to say, no bad movie is too short, no good movie is long enough.
I agree. There are definitely some scenes where they sag in the middle a little bit. The one I specifically think of is when Brad Pitt's character, Cliff Booth, gets back to his house, his trailer in the film, and he's feeding his dog. And it's like a 4-minute scene for him to open.
It is really long. Yeah.
Some dog food and put it, like, it's something that in any other movie would be like jump cutted through in seconds, Mm-hmm. Now, it does pay off. It's worth mentioning that that's not just for nothing. I think Tarantino's very nuanced that way. Like, he spends time on something that's important and then brings it back around later. And there's a ton of, like I said, surprises in this film that really come out of nowhere. You'll find something out about a character that you've seen for an hour in the film, and they'll reveal something through a piece of dialogue that you didn't know, and suddenly, oh, you see this character in a totally different way. It's a very Tarantino thing. He's very good at that, at revealing information at the right time to the audience so that we experience something that the characters on screen don't. It's a trick and suspense, and he's great at it. And this movie has a ton of that, but it's subtle. It's social. It's usually not things like there's a gun under the table, like in Inglourious Bastards, or I'm hard pressed to think of any others, but like,
right.
It's not anything particularly violent usually. It's just like, oh, hey, you didn't know this person was in a relationship with that person, or you didn't know that guy knew this person from this event. Like, the connections supersede the film we're watching. It's a bigger picture, and you're just seeing a slice of these people's lives, and it makes them feel so tangible and real, especially setting them in a Hollywood that is real for all intents and purposes, with Sharon Tate and Charlie Manson. It's really cool.
Right. Like you were saying, he does definitely take his time. There's a number of scenes with just usually 2 or 3 characters that will go on. Like I said, the scene with, is it Julia Butters, the young girl?
Yes.
They have a special moment as, you know, a budding actor and an aging actor where they really connect and help each other. And that scene goes on for very long. And we see the payoff of it later. And there's a number of scenes like that. And by the way, when we finally see DiCaprio do the villain role that he's shooting for the pilot, he's absolutely brilliant. Like
he's great.
He's amazing. Like you, and he prepares, like he has tapes of his lines that have the, you know, the other parts so he can practice acting with him. Like, he's really dedicated to the craft, and when he is on his game, he's incredible. Like, he's an incredible he's an incredible actor in real life, of course, but his character in the film is also an incredible actor. He's not someone who succeeded by being a one-trick pony. Like, he has real talent. And I mean, I think he's going to get an Oscar nomination for this. I think he really deserves it.
Oh, I think, you know, we talked about that before. Hollywood loves, you know,
itself, yeah.
Yeah, they love that self-reflection, and this is it's in the title, right? It's very much that. I'm sure there'll be a few nominations thrown around for this. I can't wait to see the look on Tarantino's face if he doesn't win. That's the way it goes. Let's talk about themes. This movie is built in the framework of a Western, and I think a lot of people would miss that, even though there are some... They're very clear and distinct Western things going on in the film. For example, Rick Dalton is a Western star. He stars in spaghetti Westerns. He is a television star, and in the film is also starring in a Western as a villain, but he's really a hero in Italy. And, like, there's a lot going on there. But, of course, the film title, Once Upon a Time In, implies Western. So what did you get out of that? Is there a clear through line here for audiences, or is it muddled and doesn't make any sense?
I mean, like I said, overall, it's a love letter to old Hollywood. It's about the golden age. It's about the great era. It's about the end of an era, but also the start of a new one. And also, you know, it's about the rose-colored glasses where we often remember things way better than they were, you know, and we remember they were like, oh, if only we could get back to that. And then you remember it wasn't really as good as you thought it was. And I think that's part of what the movie's about too. It's like, you know, a lot of times you miss the golden era because you're waiting for things to get better than they are. So it's definitely about that, again, the rising and falling of, like, Rick Dalton's career, of the start of Sharon Tate or the little girl played by Julia Butters. And then you have you know, Brad Pitt is kind of the embodiment of, he is the golden age because he's not worried about the future here. He's just living in the moment. He's enjoying the moment, and he's having a great time. Which also ties into this idea of myths and legends. It reminded me a lot, strangely, of Unforgiven, you know, which is also about it's about the end of the Western, the end of the gunslinger era in the Old West, and that's what kind of this is too. And that reminds me, there's a very important scene with Bruce Lee, or a character.
Yes.
And this is brilliant because Bruce Lee has a pretty incredible legend behind him, which seems to just get more and more out of control every year. You know, it was one thing in the 70s when, you know, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have the internet, you know, you could believe anything. But as his time has gone on, he's like, at the end of the day, the man was still like 130 pounds, man. So it play. We have a really great scene with Brad Pitt and the guy that plays Bruce Lee, which is again touches on a number of these themes about myths and legends and how we remember things.
Yeah, and I think one of the, like I said, I mentioned earlier this theme of like generational difference, right? The old versus the new. It's worth remembering, I think, this movie doesn't come just because Tarantino loves Westerns. It comes because Westerns have had an odd renaissance recently in film, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, consider the superhero film. We've talked about this in the show before. Superhero movies are very much Western films, right? The bad guy rides into town, the hero shows up, saves the day, and rides off into the sunset. That's every superhero movie, almost, unless they come in two parts like Avengers. And I think Tarantino has a lot to say about that because he is a film auteur. He is a connoisseur of this stuff. He owns a theater, which is actually featured in the film. Funny story, keep an eye out for that. Where he runs 35 millimeter prints. He's very old school that way. Like he's all about it. And I think in a lot of ways, this movie has something to say about those movies, right? That they are their own beast, and they're not necessarily bad, but, there's always a turn. There's always a time for these things to go and for something new to come in. And the Western feels a lot like that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It feels like people aren't really getting sick of them, but there's certainly a lot of them. And Rick Dalton's character, played by DiCaprio, doesn't want to go to Italy to make stupid spaghetti westerns because they're nothing like real westerns. They just don't make them like they used to. It's not the way it used to be, and there's a big theme of that. I think generations are important. I think there's a statement on the current state of Hollywood, and ultimately, I think the film has a lot to say about where Hollywood is going and why. It never just has to be because a few executives say, "Hey, this is the way things are going to go now." We don't just have to follow the same circles. Maybe you can make what you want to make in Hollywood. Maybe it doesn't have to be about who you live next to or the last two movies you did, right? Maybe you can be truly your own creator. I think that's really what he's trying to say in this movie. I think. Anyway, what do you think?
Sorry, I was focused on this. You said something that made me think of the cinematography. But yes,
we haven't talked about that yet. We should.
It's definitely. Yeah, it's a tribute to these great old movies and a certain kind of movie that isn't made as much anymore. And we talk all the time that the superhero movie is in its heyday right now. It is not, people aren't sick of them yet, but probably one day we will be. It may take another 10, 20 years, but that era will eventually come to an end, I think. Or the same way that the Western has, where they died down, but they're still made every year. Getting into cinematography, Tarantino does a great job of letting you feel like you're watching a movie that's in the 60s, a 60s quality movie. It opens with these two fake trailers of stuff that looks wild, like 60s footage of stuntmen who probably half of them died doing the things you're seeing on screen. But there's things like the camera will get real shaky sometimes. You have really bad like cigarette burns on screen or static or really hard cuts where he's making you feel like you're in a grimy grindhouse theater of the 60s with some shaky film in the back.
Yeah. And how, like I said earlier, this movie's got an energy to it and a movement, and it's not just because of the music. Like, it just feels somehow like it moves quickly. Maybe it's Brad Pitt's stuntman driving through Hollywood, with the radio turned all the way up, or maybe it's the multitude of plots that overlap over each other in a way that Tarantino has said reminds him of Pulp Fiction. He said it's probably the closest to it he's done. I disagree, but that's what he thinks. But like it doesn't feel short. The shots are quick. They're almost always on tripods, unless it's that one. I think in one handheld shot in the whole movie. It's a scene in the trailer when DiCaprio is flamethrowing a bunch of Nazis in an old movie, which is hilarious, and a weird nod to Inglourious Bastards, his own film.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah, it feels. I don't know, effective. Like it doesn't feel like anything is wasted. It never feels like I'm watching the film and I'm thinking this is. I'm never checking my watch. Like nothing ever feels like it's a waste of time or a moment. I think even speaking towards generational themes, I think even something like Bruce Lee being in the movie is a nod towards the turn of Hollywood in the film, and like he never wastes a second to show you that or to say something about it. And I've seen the movie now. It's been a few days. Like, I'm still turning it over in my head and trying to figure out what exactly it all means. It doesn't mean nothing. It means whatever you want it to mean, I guess.
Right. I just remembered this about Bruce Lee. And by the way, who's played by Mike Moe, is the actor and stunt person.
Fairly convincingly. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce Lee died in 1973 of brain aneurysm, and there's been lots of like conspiracy theories and things about his death. But he was another person who was a rising star whose star was cut short and was essentially part of that late golden era as well. So that's something I just realized now, that he's one of those tragic figures as well.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to say about this without getting into spoilers. I'm still not sure if we should do that. Do you want to pick this up after our conversation, or do you think we should just kind of wrap here and let people see it themselves?
I think we should wrap here. If there is demand for a spoiler cast, we can do that later. I did have a couple of reviews to do a spoiler cast for Midsummer, by the way.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But no, I think I'm ready for recommendations.
I think so too. One more thing before we finish this off here, and I think this goes in the spirit of us not spoiling the film for people any more than we might have. I don't think we did, but before the film premiered at Cannes last year, after which it received a 7-minute standing ovation, just to speak towards what people thought of it, Tarantino went on stage. He begged people to avoid spoilers for the movie. Here's what he said. He said, "I love cinema. You love cinema. It's a journey of discovering a story for the first time. The cast and crew have worked so hard to create something original. I only ask that everyone avoids revealing anything that would prevent later audiences from experiencing the film in the same way. Thank you." I think Andy and I are probably both inclined to agree with that. It might be Andy's first time hearing it, but I'm sure spiritually he's all in on it.
Yes,
yeah,
for sure.
So with that being said, do yourselves a favor, and if you do see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, don't spoil it for other people. Let them see it too. And with that, we should get to recommendations. Andy, would you recommend Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yes, absolutely. This is definitely going on my top 10 list. One of the best movies of the year. Is it Tarantino's best film? Maybe. It's definitely his most mature film. It shows a big leap for him as a director, that he's gotten away from the things he still indulges a little bit, but he's gotten away from the ultra violence, gotten away from endless dialogue. I don't think we even get a long shot in this movie, which he was also famous for, but he still does reference himself, but like his film was about deeper things, and he has more complex characters, and he's restrained, and I really admire that. And it's got great performances all around. It's about a lot of deep things. Like I said, it really takes you and makes you feel like you're in that era of time. So I thought it was brilliant. Highly recommend it. Content warning: it does get very violent.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Tarantino if it didn't get a little nuts. But in the best way. I would recommend this movie as well. 2 thumbs up. Unfortunately, it's not going to be for everybody. I was just telling Andy before we started the show, there were a couple women in my theater that did not particularly enjoy it. It's Tarantino, and I know a lot of people may not know what that means. I'm sure a lot of general audiences don't, but if you do, you know whether or not you like his stuff. And if you even have an inkling that you might like this movie, go see it, because it is a different kind of Tarantino. He's a lot more tamped down, but in the best way. It is totally worth your time. You will see this again on our top 10 list at the end of the year. Could not recommend it enough. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, totally worth the price of admission.